I'm Thinking of Ending Things is the most recent film from Charlie Kaufman and stars Jesse Plemmons, Buckley, Toni Collete, and David Thewlis. The film is adapted from the novel of the same name from Iain Reid, and as was to be expected, Kaufman took the source material and made it very much his own. The films Charlie Kaufman has written and directed in the past can be called a lot of things: dark, surreal, cerebral, quirky, philosophical, uncanny, disturbing, difficult, even. Kaufman repeatedly tackles complex themes like time, memory, and death. I'm Thinking of Ending Things can safely fit within all of these adjectives. It elaborates on common themes and even expands on them, yet stands out genre wise as it teeters on a fine line between being a dark comedy, a psychological thriller, and in some sequences, even a horror movie. Charlie Kaufman has many dedicated fans, I being one of them, and the general attitude among them going into this movie is that we don't know exactly where Charlie Kaufman is driving us, but we're strapped in and ready for the ride regardless of the destination. Yet upon a first watch, it stands out also in that it seems much more disorienting and inaccessible than any of his other movies. So, let me explain. I'm Thinking of Ending Things begins with Lucy and Jake as they embark on a road trip to meet Jake's parents on their secluded family farm. From the beginning, the chemistry between the couple is a bit off and definitely awkward, almost as if they're unfamiliar with each other, and as a result, we're left unsurprised to discover that Lucy is thinking of ending things with Jake. Interspliced within the driving sequence are scenes of a much older and reclusive man as he wakes up, watches cartoons with his breakfast, and goes to his job as a high school janitor. Strange happenings continue to unfold once they arrive at the snowy farmhouse. Jake gives her a tour of the farmhouse, and Lucy imagines what life must be like for sheep confined to live inside of a pen, an interesting metaphor. The pair discover two dead lambs frozen in the snow, and Jake recalls a morbid anecdote about how his father one day discovered a pig with maggots infesting its underbelly. When they go inside the house, it feels like ages before Jake's parents grace them with their presence, and later, during and after the dinner, things become increasingly dreamlike and the bizarre meter is cranked all the way up. Some of the inconsistencies in Lucy's character begin to get revealed. During the first car ride, we learn that she is a poet and studies rabies, yet at the dinner table she becomes a painter and studies quantum physics. Time seems to twist and bend, and Jake's parents alternate between ages, moment by moment switching between their normal middle age, being elderly, and even near death. Similar to his directorial debut, Synecdoche, New York, Kaufman tinkers with the idea of time flying before our eyes in an almost unconscious manner. Lucy ventures into the basement, something firmly against Jake's wishes, and discovers a collection of Jake's discarded paintings. She approaches the washing machine, and when she reaches it, discovers a janitor's uniform. It may be difficult to spot the first time around, but upon second viewing, it should become apparent at this point that Jake and the janitor character we've seen flashes of are the same person. And it is most likely that the basement, which again Jake keeps off limits, and at an earlier point was even compared to the horror movie cliche of a scary basement, is a sort of metaphor for the basement of Jake's mind, the part of his subconscious in which he keeps his abandoned aspirations locked up from the world at large. We also see a facsimile painting of the one Lucy showed off to Jake's parents as her own, but is attributed to someone else. It's a painting that is not originally hers. Similarly, when Lucy explores Jake's childhood room, she finds a book of poems, and the page is open to the poem that she recites as her own on the car ride over. The entire movie is absolutely littered with different references to forms of media, books, movies, television, poetry, art, some common, some strangely obscure. The book of poems is just one of the many forms of physical media found in Jake's room, and this fact holds one of the keys to understanding this movie. The couple finally leave the house after what seems like a lifetime and brace the blizzard on their way home. The long driving dialogue sequence that follows is again packed with many obscure references and is probably the most tedious stretch of the movie, but to be fair, does a great job of simulating a boring real-life road trip. They stop at Tulsi Town, a roadside ice cream joint, and have weird, enigmatic encounters with the three girls working there. Looking for a place to dump the cups after they hit the road, Jake takes them to his old high school. When they get there and Jake successfully dumps the cups, Lucy is able to catch her breath for a brief moment until Jake claims that someone far away was spying on them and in a fit of rage disappears into the snowy night to give them a piece of his mind. After locking herself out of the car, Lucy follows him into the school, and it is here where the film becomes much more difficult and abstract. We begin to see the threads of Jake's fantasy unravel when his older janitor self encounters Lucy. She contradicts her previous story about how she was the one to approach Jake when they met, going as far as to call him a random, inconsequential creep that was just staring at her at a bar, unable to talk to her. She leaves the janitor and comes face to face with Jake, but they are replaced by dancing doubles. What ensues can be described as an external manifestation of Jake's fantasy, where essentially boy meets girl, boy marries girl, but before they can have their happily ever after finale, a stand-in for the janitor attacks the fantasy Jake and kills him, the cold and bitter truth interrupting the sweet dream he wished for himself and can only live in melancholy illusion. The action switches to the real-life Jake, moping back to his car where hypothermia settles in and he begins having hallucinations. He sees an old Tulsi Town advertisement and sees a talking animated pig, the same one from his family farm. The pig leads him back into the bowels of the school, soothingly encouraging him to let go of the useless fantasies and accept fate and the sweet release from his lonely, unsatisfied life. It's not that bad once you stop feeling bad for yourself, the pig tells him. Kaufman then cuts to a vast auditorium where the Jesse Plemmons Jake takes the stage to accept some kind of vague award. He and all the characters and extra sit in the crowd wearing disturbing makeup that makes them look like corpses. Jake reenacts the speech scene from Ron Howard's A Beautiful Mind and performs a chillingly relevant song from the musical Oklahoma before the frame fades into a light blue and into a shot of morning where a thick blanket of snow covers the janitor's truck, leaving us to assume that Jake has died. So what are we left with? What does it all mean? My theory is that the only scenes in the film that are based in reality are the scenes with Jake as the janitor. The second half scenes with the janitor are also real, but are the product of his fantasy blending with reality. All the scenes and sequences before and in between are a fantasy projected by the real Jake on the last day of his life, and Lucy is simply an invented figment of his imagination, a loose collection of different women he encountered during his life. The fact that she is constantly switching between names and occupations, and at one point during the second driving sequence is even switched out by the female protagonist from the movie the janitor Jake watches during his break, suggests this strongly. This device gives us a close inspection of Jake's psyche when we compare the two differing stories of how they met. In the dinner scene, Lucy recalls how she was the one to approach Jake at the bar, yet in the school scene with the janitor, a Jake likely fed up with his self-perceived implausibility of this lie reverts to what he believes would have been the honest truth when Lucy admits he was just another creeper at the bar and compares the memory of him to the memory of a mosquito that bit her 40 years ago. Ouch. The ballet scene is the final act of Jake's fantasy. In it, he dreams of a past where he mustered the courage to come out of his shell and join the rest of the world, so to speak. Even his dreams of what could have been cannot rest easy against the reality which is represented by the stand-in janitor. The conclusion to his fantasy comes in the speech, which interestingly is almost completely plagiarized from A Beautiful Mind, one of the DVDs collecting dust in his room. This and the complicatedly bittersweet rendition of Lonely Room from Oklahoma clue us into what I believe is the crux of the film. Essentially, Jake is a man who in quiet desperation isolated himself to a lonely and reclusive life in favor of living through the various forms of media he digested, and the film we see played out before us is a dreamlike fantasy of what he could have been had he at some point taken the initiative to live outside of his own head. Unfortunately, he never does, and fittingly fills the role of a high school janitor, a man devoid of meaningful relationships and practically invisible to all of those around him. His reluctance to socialize relegates him to dreams and fantasies where he can project people from his real life and movies he's seen and cast them into roles in his fantasy life. As Jake says himself in the initial car ride scene, it's good to remind yourself that the world is larger than the inside of your own head. In many ways, Kaufman's directorial work has remained similar, but without a director like Spike Jonze or Michel Gondry to rein in his inner darkness, Kaufman really forces us to confront ourselves with horrifyingly relatable characters, emotions, and scenarios. When we think of I'm thinking of ending things in this sense, we don't have to allow the film to be a deflating bummer, but rather a motivating cautionary tale encouraging us to, once in a while, turn off Netflix, switch off the phone, and join the real world before it's too late.